welcome back to the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast here on Wednesday, February 6th, 2019. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today I'm going to be talking about the Sixers and the Clippers. They agreed on a trade just yesterday to send Tobias Harris to Philly, plus a lot of other players and some picks involved in that one. So I'll touch on all of that in today's episode. But first, a reminder that the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast is brought to you by Believe the Hype. This new sneaker selling company buys the latest hard-to-get pairs and sells them straight back to you. That way, you can rock the latest pair of Jordans or Yeezys, even if you miss out on their release day. Visit their Twitter and Instagram at Believe Hype Shop and check out their eBay store to see their current stock. Links to all of that down in the description. So last night, the 76ers and the Clippers agreed to a trade that would send Tobias Harris to Philadelphia. Also involved in this deal would the 76ers sending rookie guard Landry Shamet, Philly's own 2020 protected first-round pick, an unprotected 2021 first-round pick from the Miami Heat, in addition to forwards Wilson Chandler and Mike Muscala, and a 2021 and 2023 second-round picks to the Clippers. Also going to Philly are center Boban Marjanovic and forward Mike Scott. So definitely a lot of players, a lot of moving pieces in this trade that just broke recently, right here before the trade deadline. Deadline's coming up in the next 24 hours or so. At the time of recording this, still Anthony Davis has not been moved. That might change as soon as I release this podcast. Who knows? But right now, that's why I'm only touching on this Clippers and 76ers deal. So, looking at this deal now, it creates what many people are calling a big four for Philadelphia, with Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, and Jimmy Butler, and now Tobias Harris. And looking at that big four rather, it's intriguing to say the least, because looking at this Philadelphia team, they seem to have decided that this year they're going to go for it. They are going to go all out and try and try and win the East this season. And that is a little surprising, considering that right now it seems like the entire league is kind of realizing this is the last year, possibly, of the Warriors dynasty. I touched on this in another recent episode, that one Anthony Davis going to the Celtics possibly this summer. And that this is the last year of the Warriors dynasty, that the Warriors are basically going to win the West, and that there's nobody in the East who can really challenge them. What the 76ers are saying, though, is that this is the year. Because by acquiring Jimmy Butler, who's going to be an unrestricted free agent, and by acquiring Tobias Harris, who's going to be an unrestricted free agent, that means half of the 76ers' big four could possibly leave the team this summer. That they could have possibly just given away a lot of assets, including Landry Shamet, a player who people have really started to come around and like in Philadelphia, who's a solid player. In addition to players like Wilson Chandler, like Mike Muscala, but most importantly, that 2021 first-round pick from the Miami Heat, that unprotected one, which could be, people are saying at worst, a top 10 pick. Could be even better. So they definitely gave up a lot right now to get Tobias Harris. And getting Tobias Harris, I think, really fits well for this team. He's a scorer who has some decent outside range. Right now, he's shooting at about 43.4% from three. He's made 112 3-pointers this season. He can shoot the deep ball pretty well. So it's not like he's a player who is going to be just like Embiid or just like Simmons, or even to Butler to an extent, who really can't stretch the floor as much. A player like Tobias Harris is going to be able to, stand a little bit more out towards the perimeter. Yes, he can slash to the basket, but he can also score pretty well. And being able to doing all of that, is very valuable in today's NBA. And when you consider that you have players like Embiid, like Simmons, and Butler to an extent, they can't really get it done from outside on a consistent basis. I mean, look at Ben Simmons, that classic stat. If he hasn't made a three-pointer in a competitive game, I think since the Obama administration or something crazy like that, that you need to be able to, the 76ers needs people to spread the floor out on the offensive end. Because right now, there's not a lot of stuff stopping teams from just kind of digging in down in the paint to stop Embiid, to stop Simmons, to stop Butler. So Harris, I think, fits very well in that respect. He's really able to kind of go up and down the floor and offer something on the offensive end. I mean, right now he's averaging 21 points, 8 rebounds per game. He's a very, very good player. And people are making the argument they gave up all that for not even an all-star. I'd argue that some of his numbers he's putting up are close to being all-star worthy. And I mean, if you look at his career projections, how he's done, he's on the right track. He's really starting to kind of get somewhere. Recently, we saw it happen in Detroit the past couple of years, and then now in the Clippers in the past 2 years or so. He's really molding into this really good player, and I think the 76ers are the right spot for him. My question is you gave up this much. He can't be gone after this season. You gave up all this for Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris so far. If they leave this summer, even if the 76ers win the East, I don't think it would have been worth it. Because I think winning the East is the best case scenario. I think Tobias Harris significantly improves the 76ers' chances of winning the Eastern Conference. I think now the matchups between people like the Raptors, people like the Celtics get drastically more interesting. I think that matchup against the Bucks is really, really crazy because the 76ers have, in terms of raw talent, in terms of who has the most talented players, nobody beats the 76ers. I saw something say that they have the 4 top 30 players in the NBA. I think that's a little far-fetched. I don't know if I'd consider Tobias Harris top 30 per se, but they certainly have 4 very, very, very good players, 4 all-star caliber players. I think Tobias Harris has proven statistically that he is all-star level. So when you take all of that into consideration, they have that kind of talent. And basketball is a sport where it's who can throw the most talent at you over the course of a game. Certain players can dominate the game like no others, like in any other sport. And when you're going to be able to field a lineup that has, as Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris, Joel Embiid, Jimmy Butler, those players on the floor, I mean, I know Giannis is arguably the league. I think he's the league's best player right now, most dynamic. But are the Bucks really going to be able to match up well against that lineup? I know the Raptors have Kawhi. And, him and Butler are able to kind of go after. He's kind of able to, take care of Butler. But, geez, now you have to throw in Tobias Harris there as well. I don't know. I think it gets a lot more interesting with Tobias Harris on the 76ers. And in terms of what they gave up, they certainly did give up a lot. But in my view, if the 76ers are able to sign Tobias Harris, if they're able to get him to re-sign and stay in Philly, I think of this as a win-win for both teams. Because on the Clippers' point of view, right now, Jerry West over there at the other LA team, he is doing a masterful job so far with the Clippers and kind of trying to turn around that franchise. We're hearing all these rumors to people, the free agents being linked to them this summer. They're going to have the cap space to sign possibly 2 players to max deals. I think it's like them and the Knicks that have the cap space in order to do that this summer. Meanwhile, stockpiling these other draft picks, stockpiling Philly's 2020 protected first-round pick. Now, that's not going to be a great pick because that's considering next year. So the 76ers are going to be a playoff team next season. I don't see any, even with just Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, even if Butler and Harris leave, the 76ers are still a playoff team. So it's not going to be a lottery pick, but it's still a first-round pick. I mean, think about it. A player like Tobias Harris I'm looking at right now, drafted 19th overall drafted 19th overall back in 2011. Now, you usually don't find a lot of Tobias Harrises in that part of the draft, but it's not impossible. So that's something I would say is that looking at that pick, they can gain another first-round pick that's always valuable. That 2020 unprotected first-rounder from the Miami Heat, incredibly valuable. And then adding some second-rounders in there. And then somebody like Landry Shamet, who I've been very, very impressed with. And I think I'm not the only one who's been impressed with this guy throughout this season. He's a 26 overall pick by Philly. You don't have that many expectations coming into there. But so far, he's been able to shoot the three ball pretty well from about 40% from deep range. He's able to show up big in some moments. He's only averaging about 8 points a game, but I think he's a guard that's going to have some potential as being a bench player who can come off and shoot the three. And in today's NBA, that is extremely, extremely valuable. So I think that was a solid pickup there, again, by the Clippers. So if I'm the Clippers, I think no matter what, the Clippers definitely did a lot in this trade. I think they definitely got a lot for what they were giving up for Tobias Harris. I mean, there was a chance that Harris was going to leave this summer from them anyways. So the fact that they get somebody like Landry Shamet and a potential, I mean, people are saying maybe even top 5 pick from the Miami Heat in 2021, that is a lot for this Los Angeles Clippers team to kind of move forward going with it. And then also the 76ers are getting somebody like Boban Marjanovic, and, you know, Boban's always been a fan favorite, you know, you could say as a center, but at 7'3", he's just a humongous guy, a real big guy to kind of come off the bench and have, you know, make some plays, maybe provide some depth at that center position. He had a season there with San Antonio, so he has some kind of postseason experience. He was around the Spurs for a season, which, you know, that always helps having a player like that. He's a solid addition. But when you consider this trade, when you consider it all the pieces, everybody involved, the 76ers need to re-sign Tobias Harris if they want this trade to have made any sense. Because next year is the year I think the NBA really gets broken wide open. The more and more I think about it, the more and more I'm just thinking Golden State might not stay together. Now they might, and this might all kind of be for nothing. But with people like Kevin Durant, possibly Klay Thompson, with moving pieces around that Golden State Warriors team, I mean, Durant has the perfect thing going for him in Golden State, but look at Durant's past moves. Would you really rule out possibly going to the Clippers or possibly going to New York? Because honestly, I wouldn't. He's that type of player that just seems like he's always kind of moving around to the next great spot. I don't mean he's not loyal. I mean, I don't think that's a trait you're seeing that he values that highly, and I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean, he's just a player that is a product of today's NBA. Look at today's NBA. You look at players' stats lines, their career history, and it's almost a new team every year, every couple of years, just the way free agency works. So I think the Golden State Warriors, there is a legitimate shot. I don't know if it's the most likely scenario, but there's a legitimate shot that it gets broken up. And with the way NBA works today, with all this drama and all this, it seems like the chance is getting greater and greater all the time. That the Golden State Warriors, some pieces might move on, and they might not be as strong as much of a dynasty as they have been in the past several years. And then that opens up the door to teams in the East, teams like the 76ers or the Bucks or the Celtics or the Raptors, then to teams in the West to possibly get new teams in the finals and a new NBA champion. So if that's what we're looking at as a league, if that's what everybody's kind of playing for right now, I just don't understand the 76ers making this move if they can't re-sign Tobias Harris. And also, in that Jimmy Butler trade, they need to be able to re-sign Jimmy Butler. This seems like a legitimate core to build a championship team around. I'm not the biggest Ben Simmons fan. I'm a lot lower on him than most people. But I will admit, I think Joel Embiid he's super talented. From pure talent-wise, there's not many people like him in today's basketball. I think Jimmy Butler, it just brings a certain attitude to the team. I love how he's able to just nail those clutch shots. I think Tobias Harris is going to provide some scoring, stretch the floor, do some things for that team. Yes, I think there are a lot of flaws to Ben Simmons' game. I don't understand how you could be a primary ball handler in today's league and not even attempt three-pointers. I don't understand that. But if you surround him with people like Tobias Harris, J.J. Redick, other shooters around the perimeter, people like Ersan Ilyasova they've had in recent years, or somebody like Mike Muscala or Landry Shamet, who they've now gotten rid of, but people, just perimeter shooters. If you go out and sign a couple of those each year in free agency and retain some of them, I think that team works. I think the team's a legitimate shot in the Eastern Conference. And as long as there isn't a Golden State team where it's just a shoe-in for the finals, that's a finals contender. but it all hinges on the fact that the 76ers get to re-sign him. And a part of me is beginning to wonder if Brett Brown is the right coach for the Sixers team. Because at this point, after all this processing, after all this is the core you're going to go with. I think this is the core of the 76ers that's going to decide if they win a championship or not in this whole process era. This is what the process got you to. This big four. Whether that's a success in your mind or not hinges on the fact of whether they're able to keep this together. And Brett Brown, I've always liked the guy. I've always thought he's a solid head coach. But he's had his run-ins with Butler. And if I'm the 76ers, after putting the fan base through all of those years of terrible basketball, now you finally get people like Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, young players you think are the star of your team, and you have people like Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris wearing your uniform, but you need to convince them to stay. Jimmy Butler's had his run-ins with Brett Brown. If Jimmy Butler gives you an ultimatum and says, it's either me or Brett Brown, I think you got to go Butler. I think you got to go with Jimmy. And I think it would be. I would really love to see Brett Brown see this team to success because of all the things he had to go through without. I think he's a fan favorite for putting up with all that, for sticking with this team and growing with it. But every coach has its flaws, and I think in the NBA there are definitely there are good coaches out there if you just look for them. But there's not a lot of Jimmy Butlers. So I think that's going to end up being the big question coming into this offseason for the 76ers, is that getting Tobias Harris is going to get them far, but it's going to be about can they re-sign Butler and Harris. And I think for Butler, it might come down to him or Brett Brown. And I would choose Jimmy Butler, but that's a tough call for an organization, for a coach who's been with you for all these years through these tough times. And that'll wrap it up for this edition of the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Really enjoyed recording this episode. Remember, you can find this one along with the Anything Goes to Jackson Neill Podcast and the Jackson Neill Music Podcast all in the same feeds on SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, all those great places you like to listen to podcasts. The Jackson Neill Podcasts are there as well. And a reminder that the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast is brought to you by Believe the Hype. This new sneaker selling company buys the latest hard-to-get pairs and sells them straight back to you. That way you can rock the latest pair of Jordans or Yeezys even if you miss out on their release day. Visit their Twitter and Instagram at Believe Hype Shop and check out their eBay store to see their current stock. Links to all of that down in the description. Make sure to check back into the podcast feed on Friday. Now doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast and Sundays for the Jackson Neill Music. And I'll be releasing new Anything Goes interviews. Had a great one today, a new local edition here from the Philadelphia area. So stay tuned for that. You can catch all the links, all the bonus content, everything on my social media at Jackson Neill 20 on Instagram and Twitter. Links to those down in the description. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you all on Friday.